Hello, peace be upon you. Welcome to Rational Religion, where we discuss religion, science, and society. My name is Umar Nasser.
My name is Tahir Nasser.
And we are the co-founders of this platform, Rational Religion. We have a website, rationalreligion.co.uk, and we also have the YouTube channel, which you may be watching us on. Just type in Rational Religion. We've done a variety of different videos over the years, but we're going to move to this format, because of COVID, and also we're kind of half a country apart. So we thought it'd be a little bit easier to do things. And we wanted to kind of discuss a wide variety of things that this format allows, discuss how religion feeds into politics, into culture, into science, and hopefully share some of the things we've picked up, and also you can talk to us as well in the comments if you're watching us on YouTube. Let's discuss the topic that we have today, and I think we should just go straight into the video. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah,
it's quite funny.
Yeah,
so
good old Trump.
Bit of Trump. So let's discuss.
He's got to be. He's got to be the man of the decade, isn't he? Let's face it.
Fine, fair enough. Man of the year, wasn't he? So we're going to be discussing the Iranian issues earlier this year and how it relates to a variety of religious things.
Iranian issue? What are you talking about? Let's just crack on. Yeah.
I'm trying to play Mr. Trump here. If you could just give us a
Okay.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
So when did this happen, and what's he talking about?
So this is January 3rd. Qasem Soleimani, general in the Iranian army, was executed by American drone strike, killed close to Baghdad International Airport. The Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi later revealed that basically he was there on a peace mission, and that he, the Iraqi Prime Minister, was brokering a peace deal between Saudi and Iran at the behest of the United States president.
So the United States asked this gentleman, what was his name again?
Adil Abdul Mahdi, who's Prime Minister of Iraq.
Right, Prime Minister of Iraq, to broker a peace treaty between Saudi.
Or peace talks. Let's not get between over the top about it.
Peace talks between Saudi and Iran.
Yeah, that's right.
So Trump asked the Prime Minister of Iraq to broker this peace talks between Saudi and Iran. Okay, then what happened?
So they knew that basically Soleimani would then come out of Iran, would go into Iraq, that he would be, they'd know where he was going.
Soleimani being this Iranian general.
And then they drone bombed him from the sky. Okay. And the Iraqi Prime Minister was aghast. He said he expressed his disgust that while Trump was expressing gratitude for Abdul Mahdi mediating the peace talks between Saudi and Iran, he was at the same time planning to kill the man. Okay. But the question is, where did all this come from? So the reason this is important is because, and the reason we're covering it here on Rational Religion, is because you can't really understand this major geopolitical event without actually understanding the religious beliefs of Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike, particularly on the concept of the coming of a Messiah or a messianic figure, whether it's the second coming of the Messiah for the Jews and for the Christians and the Muslims, or the first coming of the Messiah for the Jews.
So we're talking about the geopolitics of Jesus' second coming.
Yeah.
Right? Or
that would make that would make a fantastic title of this video, Omar. Gosh.
And it's not just the second coming necessarily, but the whole idea of someone coming.
That's right, of a Messiah, right?
Messiah, okay.
Yeah, and Trump claimed that this killing was to stop imminent attacks. I mean, that was in the clip that you've just played.
Yeah.
But actually, 10 days after Soleimani's assassination on the January 13th, Washington officials briefed NBC News that his assassination had already been approved the previous year.
Yeah.
After Iran downed a US drone. Okay, so Iran downed a US drone, and basically, his security forces, they came and they gave Trump a series of options, and they said, look, this is the least option you could take, we think is reasonable. This is the worst option you could take. And the worst option was basically killing the top general in Iran. Okay, and Trump said he's not going to, Trump at that time came out, said he was not going to take that action against Soleimani in response to Iran downing the drone, unless a US citizen was killed. Okay, because the drone was it was an unmanned vehicle, no harm, no foul in terms of actual loss of life. And then Trump, funnily enough, he watched a video, classic Trump, TV footage of the Shia militias being backed by Iran, attacking the US embassy in Baghdad on the 27th of December 2019. resulting in the death of the US citizen. His name was Norez Walid Hamid. So when Trump saw that footage, he saw that the US citizen had been killed. He flipped his mind, decided to go ahead with killing Soleimani. He called, I think he'd maybe already called the Iraqi prime minister, but the call to the Iraqi prime minister happened like January 1st, I think. I remember reading. So it was really quite a premeditated exercise.
So how is this related to religion in any way? This just sounds like normal geopolitical, people assassinating other people, just fight for oil, etc., etc. Why is this? What has this got to do with religion?
Well, it's got everything to do with religion. It's got everything to do specifically with his geopolitical base. And for that, I think we need to specifically understand something, which is that the Christians and the Christians believe that the second coming of Christ is imminent, especially the evangelicals, I should say, not Christians in general, the evangelical Christians.
What are evangelicals? What do they believe?
So evangelicals are, it's basically a type of Christian. It's not like a sect of Christianity. They cut across many different sects of Christianity. So they have a very heavy emphasis on belief in Christ's atoning death on the cross. They have a belief in the need to be born again or conversion. They accept the Bible as absolutely authoritative and take a very literalistic reading of the Bible often. And they have a very strong belief in the concept of the second coming. And they have a very strong belief in evangelism, the necessity to preach the good word. So that's basically the hallmarks of an evangelical mindset. And evangelicals make up 26% or 25%, according to latest Pew figures, of the United States population. Okay, not Christians, population.
So they're a big group, and you're saying
they're the biggest single group.
And they have a particular affinity in some ways as being Trump's base. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because they have a belief in the second coming. So, I think you've got a clip actually relating to why they believe the second coming is so important, and from that we'll be able to see more about why is it that they support Israel, and what is their relationship between Israel and Iran, and their relationship of the relationship of Israel and Iran to their concept of the second coming. I hope that was as clear as mud. I think it probably was.
But you said before I go to that, you said the reason why they support Trump is because of their understanding of the second coming.
Yes, and we'll go through that.
Okay. So this is from this is the Vice clip.
Yeah, this is from Vice. So this is really interesting because it basically showcases Christian pastors taking around Christians, evangelical Christians, on tours around Israel, around Jerusalem. It showcases one of the tour guides' beliefs.
In addition to Armageddon, Pastor Baxter's End Times tour hits all the other local attractions associated with the apocalypse, including the most contested piece of real estate on the planet, Jerusalem, which houses some of the most sacred sites for Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. It's also where Jesus lands at the grand finale of the End Times, which doesn't pan out so great for the Jews.
2/3 of Israel will die. It's Zechariah 13, I think, maybe verse 7, 8, 9, right in that area.
Yeah.
That 2/3 will die. 1/3 will be brought through the fire, and that 1/3 will then turn to Messiah en masse when he comes back. And the scripture says that they will run out to him, and when they bow to worship him, Zechariah 13:6 says they're going to notice he's got wounds in his feet and in his hand, and they're going to say, "You're Jesus? Oh, Messiah, we've been so stubborn, we've been so proud, we've been so blind. Could you ever forgive us?" And 2,000 years of blindness is going to come peeling off the Jewish mind. And those of us that have been caught up in the rapture and come with Jesus here too long.
Oh, because the Christians have been raptured out.
All who are born again
Yeah.
will have been raptured. When Jesus comes, we'll be caught up to meet him in the air.
Yeah.
And then we will come with him to the Mount of Olives. And so we're going to be watching this whole panoramic thing unfold as the Jewish people turn to their Messiah. We're going to be converting people by the hundreds of thousands during this time. It's going to be the best of times and the worst of times.
He's a man of strong faith.
What I find hilarious is that, like, the Jews know this. Like, the Jews in Israel, they know that these Christians, they basically are expecting 2/3 of them to perish.
Right. So that's strange because these are Christian Zionists who support Israel, and I guess what's happening is they support Israel and they want some kind of war to happen because that will trigger the rapture. So they want to hasten the rapture, because the rapture is when that's going to be the great event when people like them are going to be saved. They're going to fly off with Jesus and then into the next life or whatever it is. So basically they have a vested spiritual interest in supporting Israel and producing these kinds of wars. Is that right? Am I?
Yeah, basically, and they specifically focus on Ezekiel 38. Okay, so Ezekiel 38 is a prophecy relating to the coming of Gog and Magog, and it's actually a very profound prophecy, which has been kind of literalized and what I would say completely misunderstood by these Christian Zionists. And they take everything so literally, and they conceive of it as being, Persia is relating to Iran, Zion is relating to the state of Israel, and they believe that there will be a war between Zion and Persia, and as a result of that, then the second coming will occur. Okay, so they basically are seeing a flashpoint, the war between Iran and Israel, they see as a prophesied war that will act as a flashpoint for the coming of the Messiah. And that's so important to them because they are evangelicals, okay? And their biggest people they want to evangelize to are the Jews, okay? They want to be able to stick it to the Jews after 2,000 years, okay, when Jesus comes back and says, look, exactly what the guy said in the video, 2,000 years of blindness are going to peel away from their eyes. Okay, that's what he said. So this is like the greatest, second coming is for the evangelicals, the greatest evangelical moment in world history. Okay, so it's so important to them. It's the purpose of their lives.
Right, okay. We have a clip. Let's have a look at this about the prophecy of Ezekiel.
Eric, I know from working with you for years and also from watching your show, you see things through a biblical lens. Is this in any way fulfilling biblical prophecy here?
Well, a lot of people, John, are pointing to Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. They see that alliance shaping up between Russia and Iran and Turkey, three nations that seem to be mentioned. We all have different interpretations of biblical prophecy, but Turkey, Russia, Iran seem to be mentioned in that Gog and Magog coalition force, John. And it's so interesting because these nations have historically not been allies. They've actually fought wars against each other in the past. Now, in these interesting times in which we live, we see Russia, Iran, and Turkey coming together at Israel's doorstep.
All right, Eric Stackelberg.
So that's kind of they're mentioning aspects of that prophecy, and those prophecies are obviously in Ezekiel, feature very heavily in there. And also as Muslims, it's worth saying that we believe in them, though we have a slightly different interpretation of them.
A very different interpretation, I'd say.
To what's going on, especially with respect to the coming of the Messiah. So the important links that we've tried to establish here are that Trump and his Trump is pushing.
I'm sorry, I just can't stop thinking of that video. Go on, crack on. Sorry.
Trump took a very hawkish line towards Iran and has been, right? He specifically has a strong evangelical base. He left the JCPOA. I mean, that was also part of their, the major thrust. The JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, between Iran and America, is a multinational deal to theoretically contain Iran's nuclear ambitions. I mean, the reason the evangelicals were against it was, because they don't want a peace deal with Iran. Okay, they don't want peace. People gunning for a third world war, basically.
Basically, we have a lot of people. We have approximately 25% of the United States population, theoretically, in theory, not all of them, obviously. Okay,
right, there'll be an actual minority.
There'll be differences.
That are really into it.
Exactly. But that is fundamental to their beliefs. Okay, that a war is necessary, and it's not a bad thing. Okay, it's not a bad thing. They're looking forward to it.
And is this something which, because I don't want to necessarily, paint everyone who calls himself an evangelical with the same belief. Presumably, there's going to be some diversity of opinion in
that's
with respect to
what I said. That's what I said. Yeah, that's what I said, didn't I? I said, not necessarily every single person, okay, but it is a feature of the beliefs in general of the evangelicals. And
presumably, much of their religious leadership or reasonable amount are very into
Yeah.
And do they and they have some kind of representation in government through Pence as well, specifically, right?
Yeah, so Mike Pence, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pence, the Vice President, and also Secretary Pompeo, the Secretary of State, they are both evangelical Christians, and them two in particular have been particularly gunning for kind of sanctions on Iran, for revoking the JCPOA, and they were both very positive about this whole killing of Soleimani.
So let's watch a clip from Mike Pompeo.
He would work every day to make sure that the Lord's word governed our actions each and every day. It was a remarkable moment. We are blessed to live in Kansas, where there are so many people that understand that. We will continue to fight these battles. It is a never-ending struggle until that moment Pastor Fox spoke about, until the rapture. Be part of it. Be in the fight.
Infinite military funding until the rapture. Okay.
So that was before. That was like 2 years before he became. I think that was in the mid 2016, 2015 or so. So that was before, he kind of he became Secretary of State. But it shows his belief system that he cites the rapture as an event, which is not a normal thing, I think, for Christians to do generally. That's a feature of the evangelical beliefs. And we know he's an evangelical Christian anyway. And the significance of this is actually brought sharply into focus when you compare Trump's approach to the evangelicals compared to, for example, Senator McCain. Now, Senator McCain, who ran against Obama, he was not well known for his, liberal view. He wasn't a dove. I mean, this guy was all for bombing other countries, okay? He was for the Iraq War, he was for Libya, he was for pretty much every war that the United States has been involved in, going back to Vietnam, okay? He was definitely regarded as a war hawk, okay? And this guy renounced the support of John Hagee, who's a pastor, who's an American pastor. He's the founder of a community or a group or a lobby group called the Christians United for Israel. Okay.
Right. So those are literal Christian Zionists.
Yes, they're absolutely. Yeah, it was, Ron Seal does what it says on the tin. So, Christians, or anybody from outside the UK won't get that reference. Or not born prior to 1995. No, that's not true. Ron's still going for a while. But the point I want to make.
Moving on.
The point I want to make is that the Christians United for Israel, headed by this pastor John Hagee, they were ostracized even by the Republican Party under John McCain. But there was one senator who was steadfast with the Christians United for Israel, and that was Mike Pence.
Right.
And then Trump came into power and he made Pence his vice. Pence brought in, they're called Kufi, Christians United for Israel. He brought them in from the cold, brought them into the mainstream. And they have enormous power now over Trump's base, and they are a prominent part of Trump's base as a lobby group.
Okay, so I guess what's going on here then is that we have, Trump and the people around him. Trump, I imagine, doesn't have these strong religious beliefs, but he has specific interests, political interests, and he has groups that he needs to please. And through Pence and Pompeo, evangelical Christians are probably slightly disproportionately represented in the political thought of that group. And as part of that, you have a planned war, or what they believe is a prophesied war, between literally Iran and literally modern day Israel to trigger the rapture. And that may coalesce very well with certain corporate interests, and there are obviously all kinds of other geopolitical things that come into these things. But that's convenient and it works. So all kinds of meshes. It kind of meshes all together. So then, where do we have? Actually, I think we have a clip which might be quite useful to show of Hagee. So let's see what he's been saying.
May the people of Israel be comforted by the hand of God, that for the first time in 2,000 years, millions of Christians in America and around the world now stand with Israel. We are obeying the word of God. Now let the word of God go forth from this place today, that Israel lives, and the body of Christ supports the Jewish people. Amen. Give the Lord a shout of praise in the house of God.
I mean, it's weird given that they think 2/3 of them are going to die, and that they're looking to accelerate this.
I find it funny that the Israelis kind of are happy with that. But I am and I'm not. You know, they're nothing if they're not practical, I must say. The Israeli Zionists, you know. So
well, let's discuss about the Israelis themselves, and what is the sort of Orthodox Jewish position or the Jewish position that's represented in the Israeli state. I mean, what are their views on the idea of a Messiah coming and the rapture and all of these kinds of things?
So obviously they don't believe in the rapture. I mean, the rapture is a Christian concept, but they do believe in the coming of the Messiah. And, you know, it's always chalked down to the Orthodox or the ultra-Orthodox who believe in this. But actually, it's a very widespread belief, the coming of the Messiah. It's a mainstream belief. I mean, the whole point of the Wailing Wall is that Jews go to the Wailing Wall and they beseech God for the coming of the Messiah. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's why it's called wailing. You know, it's because it's been so long, etc. Okay?
Yeah.
So... the thing about the current Israeli administration, the Likud party under Benjamin Netanyahu, Netanyahu, I can't remember when he came into power. I think he came into power approximately same time I was born, frankly. You know, came to power. Let's have a look at it. I mean, I think he came to power in the 1990s. So he actually has had 2 stints as Prime Minister of Israel. And it was punctuated by a brief kind of more liberal, slightly more liberal, yeah, he came to power first in 1996 to 1999. And then he reassumed office in 2005, I think it was. No, 2009, sorry. 2009, he won again. So he, you know, this is, so he was, yeah, that's right. So he's been in power a long time, and the Likud party is, I would say, I think most people would say, an Orthodox right party in Israel, and so they draw a lot of their base is very much the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox communities in Israel. And we must draw a distinction between the Orthodox communities in Israel and the Orthodox communities outside Israel, many of whom do not support the state of Israel. And we can go into that why, because a lot of that is related to the concept, their different interpretation of the concept of the second coming. So, you know, you may have seen Orthodox Jewish rabbis with Palestinian flags around their necks talking about how Israel is an awful state that needs to completely be dismantled. Because they believe that you cannot have worldly authority until the coming of the Messiah. So the Orthodox rabbis outside Israel, many of them who are anti-Israeli, they are anti-Israeli because they believe that the Jews have set up, or the Christian Zionists in Britain set up the state of Israel for Jews, presumptively before the Messiah has come, and that actually the Messiah is meant to come down first.
Yeah.
And he will set up the state and he will give you worldly power, right? So they actually believe that this has been done presumptively and therefore is in disobedience to God's commands. But the Jews in Israel who accept that Israel has been formed, who accept that it is a grace of God, they have kind of inverted that classical Jewish belief, because the Jews always believed that the Messiah would come first, then the worldly domination would be given. Exactly. That was the point of the Messiah's coming for the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They said to Jesus, you know, you're not giving us anything. You're not the king, right?
Yeah.
You're saying your kingdom is not of this world. We don't want to hear that. We want to hear you're going to deliver us from the Romans. So basically, there's been an inversion in history because of the opportunity of having their own state.
I mean, that is amazing, because it shows that there is that this issue of Jesus coming, or Christ's coming, or the idea of the advent of the Messiah is so prominent in major groups in the world, and it's having huge political repercussions. And we have a very interesting clip here from a rabbi, quite an eminent rabbi, discussing with Netanyahu, and he's talking about this. So let's have a look at that. Since we last met, many things have progressed. Netanyahu says yes, many things have progressed. What hasn't changed, however, is that the Messiah still hasn't come. Do something to hasten his coming. And Netanyahu says, we're doing. And the other guy says, well, it's evidently not enough. Many hours have already passed today, and he's still not here. But there are still a few hours left in the day, so try still for today, i.e. make it soon. And Netanyahu looks very solemn and sincere. So, I mean, that's I think that's that shows that, you know, people with these beliefs and Netanyahu's agreeing with it is, you know, are meeting the leader of the state. So this is certainly a very prominent belief. So we've talked about the Christians and we've talked about the contemporary Jews.
And how the contemporary Jews, remember, fall into two categories. Okay, that's a really important distinguishing thing to bear in mind, because when we get to the Muslims, we're about to talk about the Muslims in a minute. They're actually undergoing that transformation that the majority of the Jews have already undergone. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
what are the two groups?
So the two groups are, you know, the classical belief, which is that the Messiah will come, he will give you worldly domination, he will give you a state.
Yeah.
Okay. But because the Christian Zionists in Balfour's Declaration already set up the state of Israel for the Jews, and the Jews found their opportunity to have a state, they went to it, and therefore they modified their belief post the formation of Israel that, okay, we have a state now, and the Messiah will come down and support us. Okay. So many Muslims are now going through the same transition. Okay. And that's what ISIS was all about. They basically got fed up of waiting for the coming of the Messiah. Okay.
Or the ideological
strand in them. They basically became, you know, the ideology was that has always been for the extremists, that just like the Jews, you know, believe that the Messiah would come and give them worldly domination, just like the Christians believe that the Messiah will come and will rapture them up to heaven, and everybody else, all their enemies, are going to be killed or converted.
Worldly dominion through worldly dominion.
Exactly. The Muslims simultaneously have, I wouldn't say this is a classical belief, this is a medieval belief. And actually, I would say that about all of these three groups. These are medieval concepts. They're not original religious concepts. And we'll talk about what the original religious concept is.
Medieval meaning, because obviously with the Jews much before the medieval period, but these are things which, these are beliefs which originated much later in their state, you know, in their history. So it wasn't necessarily reflective of the original teachings, but it's something that comes in, perhaps as the people themselves become more worldly and start to think in a more worldly ways, and they understand all spiritual things in a worldly way.
It's completely contrary to the religious beliefs, the original religious beliefs. It's not just possible; it is completely contrary to the original religious beliefs. But let me just clarify. So the Muslims, people, extremists, for example, the ideology is that Christ will come. There will be an imam from amongst the Muslims known as the Mahdi, and they will set up worldly domination for the Muslims. Okay, basically, ISIS got fed up of waiting. Okay, and they sought to grab land. Okay, the idea was they can establish the Islamic State, okay, and then Christ will come after that.
Yeah, so kind of readying the ground, saying, look, it's all set up for you, you know, come down, we've got a landing pad, you know, come down, I guess is
clear the grass.
Yeah. So I mean, but that is actually the spirit of it, isn't it? So we've started this as almost like a perverse act of charity, or a perverse act.
Well, this is precisely
divine character.
Yeah, this is precisely what the Christians, evangelical base in supporting Trump, you know, killing the Iranian, are doing. They're not saying we're going to leave it to God. They're saying trigger the war, get on with it. Okay, hasten his coming. Okay, what's this rabbi saying to Bibi Netanyahu? He's saying, hasten his coming, do something. There are a few hours left in the day. And ISIS take exactly the same theoretical position. Their means might be different. You know, they don't have a state, so they don't operate through a state like the Christian evangelists do. They don't operate through a state like the rabbi might when talking to Bibi Netanyahu. They're terrorists. So they seized land and took it in their own hands and made their own state.
Right.
But the ideology is fundamentally the same. The ideology is that, you know, we need to hasten his coming, as if God is basically sitting on his laurels and he needs somebody to poke him with a stick and go, come on, man, get on with it. Send down the man.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, let's, I want to go into this a little bit more detail of the specifics here, because I think it's important for people to tease out and then to understand from a theological and religious point of view why actually these interpretations aren't well supported at all. And I think we have to start really with with 0 AD/CE, the time of Jesus, and what were the different beliefs there of Jesus, peace be upon him. What were the different beliefs there? So what did so
you know this as well as I do. You crack on.
Okay, I'll crack on. So, so the Jewish belief was that Elijah was going to come back, because I think that was spoken about, was it in Malachi?
Yeah.
That Elijah was going to come back and he would herald the coming of Christ. And Christ was someone who would give the Jews worldly dominion. He would deliver them from the Romans, and obviously at the time they were under the yoke of the Romans. And that the whole salvation, the salvation which he would bring, yes, it would be spiritual, but it'd be very much through worldly means. So that was their belief of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And in fact, the Jews had become very extreme at the time. They'd become highly literalistic. They'd become very, highly ritualistic, and also literally extreme in the sense that you had, the zealots among them, people who are very similar to modern day Muslim extremists who fought against the state and sought to actually overthrow it through acts of terrorism. So there are very many similarities between contemporary aspects of the modern Muslim world and the Jewish world at the time. So that was their belief. And what happened? Jesus came. He was a man who's from the Essene order. He was known as a very pious young man, and he claimed that he was the Messiah, and he claimed that he was the Messiah that they had been waiting for, and that he wanted to give them the kingdom of heaven, and that kingdom wouldn't be a worldly dominion, but actually it would be a spiritual dominion. And he said that when you've all become highly literalistic and highly very extreme in your interpretations, I have come to restore the spirit. And he said, I've come to fulfill, I've not come to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. So he actually upheld very explicitly several times in the gospel that he was a Jewish teacher who had come to restore spirituality to Israel. And with respect to so that was the aspect of why aren't you a physical king? He said, well, this was never what should have been expected. I've come to reform you spiritually. Prophets come from God to take care of your soul, not to primarily bring you worldly dominion. And because you're so materialistic, that's all you can understand. That's the only way that you can understand prophecies, and that's all you hanker after. So that's why you're interpreting it that. But it's that very attitude that I have come to fix. So don't reject me on the basis of your corrupt attitude, because it's the corrupt attitude I'm here to actually mend.
Exactly.
Now,
they're judging them by a false yardstick.
Yeah. And with respect to the charge that, why hasn't Elijah come back? He said, Elijah has come back, but you have not recognized him. It was John the Baptist who's come in the spirit and power of Elijah. So Jesus' own interpretation of the second coming of the idea of a second coming was not that someone's going to literally come back out of the sky, but actually that someone who's going to come, who's born a normal person, and they're going to come in the spirit and power, i.e. they're going to be like a spiritual reflection of a previous prophet.
And do the same perform the same function, really.
Perform the same function. So that was his answer to all of these charges. Yeah. And obviously many Jews accepted him and became known as the Ebionites, and they spread throughout Asia, and Paul set up a lot of the church in Europe. People won't know this, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit later, but the Ebionites spread throughout Asia, and they were followers of Jesus, and when Islam came, they then converted into Islam, which means that the only people now who claim to be followers of Jesus, exclusionary followers of Jesus, are the European followers of Jesus that became known, that were the Pauline Christians. Whereas actually in the 5th century, you'd have a group in Europe who would have...
The majority were Ebionites. The majority were Ebionites.
Well, no, but in Europe, for instance, you had, in the West, in the West, roughly, you can say, you had Paul's followers who had quite different beliefs to the Asian followers, who had a much more Jewish character. So that's a bit of a sidetrack, but the point is that Jesus was successful in his mission, right? Many of the Jews believed him. Many, however, rejected him, or at least some rejected him. In Palestine, especially in the tribe of Judah that was there, and obviously that there's a strand of Jews that have continued throughout the millennia.
And the interesting thing is that the Jews who
have become known as the Jews, whereas actually originally there were 12 tribes of Israel.
The
Israelites were much more dispersed.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the northern kingdom of Israel was the 10 tribes, and then there was the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and there was southern kingdom, which was 2 tribes, the tribe of Judah and I think Benjamin as well. And those 10
Was
tribes.
it the kingdom of Judah?
It was the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Israel comprised 10 tribes, and the kingdom of Judah comprised 2 tribes, one of which was the tribe of Judah. And the northern kingdom was taken by Nebuchadnezzar off to the east, and so the people who were left by the time the Romans arrived were 2 of the 12 tribes, okay? And of them, most of them converted to Jesus' following of Ebionites. So the proportion who are actually Jews in the end, who we could recognize as Jews, are a tiny proportion of the smaller proportion, a tiny proportion.
You're gonna have to start again.
They're a tiny proportion of a sixth of all of the Jews.
Okay, so you have the Israelites.
You have 12 tribes. Yeah,
12 tribes. 12 tribes in Israel.
No. Yeah, the 12 tribes of Israel, but the kingdom of Israel was 10 tribes. Okay,
Right.
The kingdom of Judah was 2 tribes. Okay, Kingdom of Israel gets taken off 600
So they're all
BC.
over.
Yeah,
Tibet.
Yeah, Kashmir,
they're eastern.
Tibet. They're eastern. It says in the Bible they get taken to the east of the east. Okay, they're the Afghanis, the Kashmiris, the Tibetans, the Nepalese, etc. They get mingled in with the local populations. Okay, Cyrus the Great frees them. Okay, the southern kingdom, which is the kingdom of Judah, they're the ones who persist in Judea until the time of Jesus. Okay, and most of them, when Jesus comes, accept him.
Yeah.
Okay. A small proportion of them reject him. Right. They are formed principally of hardline Pharisees, Sadducees in general, the really hardline ones, and especially the Zealots. And the evidence of this is, people might say, well, this is, an unacceptable anti-Semitic thing to say. But the evidence of this is that 40 years after Jesus is crucified, what do you get? You get the Bar Kokhba revolt. And you get a series of revolts resulting in major Jewish-Roman wars spanning over 50 years until 120 AD. And towards the end of that period, you get the Jews set up, the Zealots, I should say, set up the Jewish state of Israel for 3 years. Okay, in Judea. They basically rebel against Rome. They have their own armies. They set up their own state for 3 years. Okay, Emperor Titus, after 3 years, marches into this newly created state, this statelet within the Roman Empire, massacres 300,000 Jews. Okay.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that many.
Yeah. 300,000, that's the estimate. Okay.
Horrific.
And then basically he says, get out of here. All right. Some Jews do stay on in the Roman Empire. A lot of people think they're banished. They're not banished. Jews actually, some Jews continue to stay in Judea. A lot of them moved north, and most of them moved north. Okay. So the consequence of rejecting a person who came and who said, I am Jesus Christ, I am the Messiah, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's, and rejection of the message that your religion needs to be separated from your political ambitions, that I have not come to give you worldly dominion, I've come to liberate you from unrighteousness and evil of your hearts, right? The consequence of that is that those who rejected him took the extreme opposite position. They became more hardened in their belief that the Messiah will come and give us worldly dominion, and they got fed up of waiting, just like ISIS have. Okay, they got fed up of waiting and they set up their own state, and the consequence of it is that they got decimated by the ruling the superpower of the day. Yeah.
Now let's talk about the contemporary Muslims, because actually there are many similarities between the contemporary Muslims and the Jews of
100%.
the first century. And actually this was something that was prophesied, Muslims believe, by the Prophet Muhammad. There's actually read it quite clearly that the sins that affected the Jews at the times of the Jesus would be repeated in the Muslims at the time of the second coming of the Messiah. Such that it's said there'll be like 2 shoes, they'll pair up so closely together that the Jewish condition would be reflected very almost perfectly, almost completely with the Muslims later on. And of course that the Quran says that that Moses, peace be upon him, was the prototype of Muhammad, peace be upon him. That Moses was a great law-bearing prophet, and in the 14th century after him, Jesus came, the Messiah, who would reform the extreme beliefs of the Jews once they had lost the spirit of their religion. And so one can very easily infer that the second coming of the Messiah in the Muslim dispensation would also be in the 14th century after Muhammad, peace be upon him, once the Muslims had become very extreme in their understanding of things, very hard-hearted, and have lost their spirit of their religion. So
and the best evidence of the fact that Muslims have reached that point is the politicization of Islam. Just like the Jews at the time of Jesus had basically politicized their religion, they were looking for a political solution, a religious solution to a political problem. Okay. Similarly, Muslims today, Islam has variations of practices as political states. Okay. And, you have states which have taken on particular religious positions. So Saudi is an exclusively Sunni state. Iran is largely and exclusively Shia state. Okay. And you have other Muslim countries as well that then line up along these axes of sectarian axes. Okay. So now this was not the case 100 years ago. It simply wasn't. Okay. So this has all happened in the last 120, 130 years.
But the seeds were there in the ideologies of many of the Muslims even 150 years ago. In terms of
the seeds were there, but it's not actually the case that
but you're saying the manifestation
yes.
in the extreme politicization of religion only happened in the last century. And people may say, oh well, it's America's role, and they've gone in, corrupted these countries, and they have their invested interests in holding up the Saudis and all the various dictatorships. And I think we'd agree, that's all very true. But if one is not corrupted from within, you can't be corrupted from without. So I don't think we can excuse the Muslims and the Muslim leaders themselves from taking responsibility for their beliefs and their actions. It is a two-way thing.
It's only an unhealthy body that gets infected from an external source. Okay. That's a fact.
Yeah. So what is the contemporary Orthodox, or let's say mainstream Muslim belief about what's going to happen with the second coming of Jesus? Can you spell that out again for us? Because I think that's very important.
Yeah. So basically, the Muslims believe in general that two figures will appear, towards the end times, and that there are major and minor signs that would be fulfilled, and the Prophet Muhammad prophesied lots of these signs. In fact, I'd say all of them have now been fulfilled, which is why Muslims are like freaking out. They're like, the Messiah is going to come any day now, because these signs are not minor. They're not like vague prophecies. I mean, one of them, for example, is that towards one of the signs of the hour, it's called. These are called the signs of the hour. The hour is coming, right? One of the signs is that goat herding Bedouin Arabs will compete with one another in constructing who can construct the tallest buildings.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that is such a specific sign, which has been filled so specifically with the states of the UAE, Bahrain, etc. You'd have to be a complete moron, frankly, to think that hasn't been fulfilled. It's clearly been fulfilled. Yeah. You'd also have to be, you've got to ask yourself some serious questions about, this man clearly knew some stuff that, he could not possibly have known himself. So, I mean, another one of those signs, for example, was that there'll be a new form of transportation in that age, which will eat fire and breathe smoke. And it will travel like a cloud being driven by a wind, that its length would be 60 yards between its ears. It was described as a donkey with ears, that the earth would be folded up for it, that the sea would be ankle deep for it, that it would bear mountains of goods on its back. So clearly talking about new form of transportation that would make transportation much easier, and that would basically shorten like a month's journey into a day is another one of the references.
And explicitly, this would be at a time when the she-camel would be abandoned as a form of transportation, and this new form of transport would happen. So, I mean, he obviously didn't have the vocabulary to say cars and trains. These things wouldn't have been understood in that time. They likened it as to a donkey, but gave all these characteristics which are clearly talking about modern forms of travel. So what you're saying is that there are many signs of the the coming of the Messiah that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, spoke about as happening in this age, and therefore Muslims, those who understand these things, and generally there's a sense that this is the era of the second coming of the Messiah, right? So they believe in that, but their expectation is similar to the Jews, right? Because they also believe that he will be that a bloody Messiah will come, so and that a Mahdi will come. And then they will team up. And what will they do? What is going to be their behavior?
So their belief is that, in general, the Mahdi will fight a battle, okay? That the Mahdi will fight a battle on behalf of the Muslims. The Mahdi will be an imam from among the Muslims, will be guided by God. He'll somehow know that he's the Mahdi, and he will lead the Muslims and armies against the Christians, okay? And he will lose. And then at that point in that major war, again, it's another war we're talking about. At that point in the major war, the Messiah will then descend from heaven, and that will be Jesus from 2,000 years ago.
Now, you're saying this is what the prophecy says. Is that literally what prophecy says, or is this an interpretation of
No. This is what the Muslims believe. Okay.
Right. So this isn't actually in the text of the prophecies.
There are some prophecies that do talk about this, but
not
frankly,
in the way that you've just said.
No, there are some prophecies that talk about this exactly in the way I've just said. In terms of a war, etc., but they are completely self-contradictory. Okay, many of them were invented at a time when Muslims were it was 400 years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, and Muslims were then effectively creating narrations to justify the expansion of their empire against another person's empire, right? And they were saying the Mahdi is about to come, and there's going to be, he's going to support my war against you. Okay.
So in some traditions, these kinds of things appear, but they're not. We wouldn't necessarily call them prophecies.
We wouldn't call them prophecies. They're not authentic, because you look, for example, at Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, which are the two most authentic books of hadith. These prophecies don't appear at all, and the reason is because, in fact, you don't even find reference to the Mahdi, because Imam Bukhari knew that the concept of the Mahdi has been so utterly twisted, because it's been already politicized and used innumerable times through false narrations. The only mention you find of what the coming of the Messiah will do, because these, a lot of ISIS and a lot of general Muslims, I should say, actually, who don't hold extremist attitudes, but do hold this extremist theology in the back of their mind, which is that the Mahdi will fight a war against the Christians, and then the Messiah will come and he will give victory to the Muslims by leading that fight against the Christians and defeat them. Okay? That's all belied by the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that when the Messiah comes, he will yada'ul harb. He'll put an end to religious war. Right?
Yeah. And so when faced with Gog and Magog, God says, don't fight them.
Yes, exactly.
Don't fight them. Take refuge in the mountain and pray.
Exactly. So the most reliable references we have in the most reliable texts of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim,
which are books of traditions,
right, and the most authoritative, they say the complete opposite of what is believed by the majority of Muslims today. And what is believed by the majority of Muslims today is actually a perversion of what the Christians and the Jews believed, because the Christians and Jews entered into Islam and carried with them a lot of those kinds of beliefs, which are actually peripheral beliefs, not related to the core doctrines of the religion. Okay? And so just like the Christians believe that Jesus ascended to heaven and he will come down again and grant dominion to the Christians, they brought that belief into Islam, and Muslims started to believe that Jesus also ascended to heaven and that he will also return to earth and that he will grant dominion to the Muslims.
Yeah. So before we discuss that point, and we're coming towards the end of this discussion here, let's be clear then what we're saying. The mainstream view of Muslim scholars today, in terms of their interpretation of these prophecies of the end times, or the latter days, is that you will have two leaders that come. So one, the Imam Mahdi, who will come from the Muslims themselves. He will somehow know he's the Imam Mahdi, and he will fight some great battles. And literally, Jesus Christ of Nazareth is going to descend literally from the sky, literally from heaven above us. And he's going to team up with him, and you're going to have lots of bloody wars, and then the Day of Judgment. So basically, it's almost identical to the belief of the rapture, but with you just take out Christians, put Muslims in there, right?
Basically,
and that's an incredibly it should be a very unsettling point, because your expectations, the point you've made in many of your articles over the years, your expectation of
It's not
divine.
my point.
Sure. Well, yeah, but you have put it in many articles. Is the
It
point
was the point of
founder
Mirza
the
Ghulam Ahmad, founder of the Ahmadiyya community, in the opening introduction chapter to a book called Jesus in India.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself the question, why did he talk about jihad exclusively in the opening chapter to a book on the real life of Jesus? It's because he, in 1905, understood the relationship between terrorism, extremism, and the concept of Jesus' second coming, like people still don't understand this idea.
Yeah, and that's the book Jesus in India by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community. You're wondering who that is. That was him, and he's the founder of the community, the Muslim community to which we belong, and the kinds of things that we're saying is obviously representative of the beliefs of the Ahmadiyya community.
And guess what? That's the face of the second coming.
Right.
Congratulations, congratulations, everybody! You missed it.
Well, I mean,
well, you missed it, but there's still chance. Still chance.
Where obviously we in the Ahmadiyya community are looking to spread this message, but it's. I mean, I want to make this more explicit, because the point that I was making is that your expectation of divine behavior, which Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the individual we just showed, your expectation of divine behavior colors your own behavior, because morality ultimately stems from your conception of God, and
the highest ideal. The highest ideal.
God is the highest ideal. Human behavior should seek to emulate that. So if you have this belief that God is going to come and murder people, or rather that God is going to send someone who's going to come and start murdering people for not believing and start fighting all these bloody wars, then it essentially sanctions your own behavior in that way, because you can say, look, I was following the divine mold. This is how you do things, and therefore this is how we do things. So it's actually a very important socio-political thing as well, to try and dispel some of these myths and to dispel some of these ideas, which I think we would stress are not at all founded in the original religions. Especially, we can make the case extremely well for Islam, which says that there is no compulsion in matters of faith in chapter 2. There's to you your religion, to me my religion, and which fundamentally also says that Jesus died a natural death on earth, right?
Yeah. So I mean, the Quran clearly states that Jesus is dead, that Jesus did not ascend to heaven. It says that God exalted him to God Himself, which is completely different to saying God. He ascended him to heaven, and it also states explicitly that He is dead. The Quran in Mirza Ghulam Ahmad presented 30 verses of the Quran which demonstrate that Jesus has died a natural death. And in fact, Jesus has been stated as having died a natural death more times than all the other prophets combined. It's like God really wanted to emphasize the point: Jesus is dead.
Right, and that's because it would have this this immense importance later on in religious history. We can put some links below for any Muslims that in particular who are interested in the verses which speak about the death of Jesus, peace be upon him. Like every other prophet, this isn't some kind of slight toward Jesus, right?
Yeah, of course not. The best of prophets from the Muslim perspective, Muhammad, peace be on him, is dead. Yeah, he's in paradise. He's not on earth.
So, I mean, let's then paint the picture to wrap up of our view of Jesus and our views of the second coming. So,
well, you've already described the second coming and what Jesus' position was. So, how would you relate that to what's happened today?
Well, before I answer that, if I may, I just want to discuss what Jesus' narrative was, or what Jesus' story was, because I think that's important how we view that. Because a lot of people will be thinking, okay, but didn't He die on the cross? How didn't he ascend to heaven? How can we, if He's in heaven, how come He doesn't come back? Right?
Didn't he ascend to heaven?
So
I'm sure that happened.
Well, I mean, briefly, and we're not going to cover this in depth. We're just going to lay out the narrative here. Our view from the Gospels themselves, from an informed understanding of religious history as a whole, and from the Quran, is that Jesus came as a man and a prophet, the final prophet to the children of Israel, the Messiah that was prophesied throughout Jewish history. And He said to people...
The final prophet from among the children of Israel, not the final prophet to the children of Israel.
Sure, yeah, that's true. That's a good point. He said that I have been sent from God. I've come to reform you, and that you shall see no sign of my truth except for the sign of Jonah. Very important point which he emphasized several times in the Gospels. Sign of Jonah, of course, is that when Jonah was thrown out into the sea, he was saved by the whale taking him up and giving him sanctuary. And Jesus says that you shall see no sign except for the sign of Jonah. Then another place he says, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth, I believe is the quote.
Yeah.
So he speaks about that he'll have similarity to Jonah. Now, Jonah's story is very, very clear. If you read the story of Jonah in the Bible, it's very clear that in a time when Jonah thinks that he's going to die, he is saved from basically certain death through an incredible miraculous means. At no point, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, founder of the Ahmadiyya community, was at pains to point out, at no point did Jonah die.
Yeah.
He was alive throughout. So
it wasn't a story of death and resurrection. It was a story of survival in the face of death.
Right. So Jesus emphasized, this will be my sign. And at one point he says, there will be no sign shown unto you except for this. Right. So this must have been his major sign. That when I will appear to be with, moment from death, God will save me through miraculous means and I will survive.
Yes.
Now, our belief, and I won't go into in detail, is that he was put on the cross, but he was only up there for between 3 to 6 hours, probably about 3 hours.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough to kill a young, fit man. He then survived, so he fell into a swoon or into a coma. He was taken down. He fainted, yeah. He was taken down. His followers applied healing aloes to his wounds, which is well documented, including by a doctor, well documented in the Gospels. He then recovered in the sepulchre and came out, and many, many people then who saw him, the Bible talks about, then believed in him, because it became suddenly Jesus that they said they would kill him. Right? The Jews and the Romans tried to kill him. He survived, and that was his sign. He said, I will survive, because that's the sign of Jonah. He survived, and then he fled east, because he said, that I have come also for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and they will hear my voice, and there'll be one flock and one shepherd. That he would go to them.
Yeah, and the key point is that, he comes out the sepulchre, he's got wounds in his hand, and his disciples say, is it really you, or are you a ghost? So they say to him, look, what does it mean to say, are you a ghost? It means, am I seeing you post-death? That's what it means.
Yeah.
Right? That's the definition of a ghost. Am I seeing you post-death? And he says, no, I'm not a ghost. Feel my hands and feel my wounds, because a ghost does not have flesh and blood as I have. And then to confirm to them that he is actually in his original same body, that he is a human being who has not died, he asks them if there's any food that he can eat. In other words, he's in a protein deficient state. He needs to do a bit of wound healing. The
ICU doctor coming out on you.
And he needs some decent fish and honey. That's what he gets.
Yeah, and that's doubting Thomas before that, putting his hand in his wounds.
So the greatest evidence that Jesus didn't die is that he didn't die.
You've seen it live.
Well, no, that he. It's an absurd scenario, isn't it? Really, because if, for example, I take the question of Jesus completely out of the picture, and I say, I know somebody apparently, and there was an assassination attempt against him, and everybody thought he died, but then he was seen walking around 3 days later with the gunshot wound, healing, and he had a dressing on it. And I went to him and I said, my God, mate, am I seeing a ghost? And he goes, no, mate, ghosts don't have bullet holes. Okay. What does that mean? It's the exact opposite of what the Christians have derived from it.
Yeah. And what Paul actually created.
We can go into that, but the brilliant thing I love about it is that Occam's razor is so powerful in this instant that you cannot deny the fact that anybody who has seen post-assassination attempt with the wounds of the assassination attempt, the simpler answer, and who deny being a ghost and who try and eat your food, the simpler answer is they did not die. And the fact of the matter is that Jesus suddenly disappears. And the explanation is given 200 years later in the Gospels, which doesn't appear in any of the early Gospels. It pops into existence about 250 years after Jesus' existence. is that he ascended to heaven. And the assumption on the part of the Catholic Church is the doctrine of assumption, that they assume that Mary also went up to heaven with him. I mean, the funniest belief I've ever come across, maybe apart from that dude from Vice, to have a whole doctrine called the doctrine of assumption, that we assume that Jesus' mother went up to heaven as well, because
it shows a gap.
She disappears. It's an obvious gap in knowledge, and what happened? Well, I'm sure you're going to cover that now.
Well, it's all in line. The thing is, this is, we do not mean any disrespect to Jesus or his followers. And in fact, we are doing utmost respect to Jesus, because we are saying that the prophecies that he made were fulfilled. He said that you will see the sign of Jonah, right? The sign of survival. Yeah. He survived. And then he said, I will go and speak to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. 10 tribes were not where he was. 10 tribes were scattered in the east. Right? Yeah, so what happens? Described. Inference to the best explanation. What is the simplest thing? What is the best explanation here? Did he just go up to heaven, a completely unwitnessed event which has so many things don't really make sense of it? Or does he actually fulfill his prophecy and say, actually, I will go to the east and I will preach to them? And then in the 1st century AD, throughout Buddhist and Hindu scriptures, you have people talking about a white, a fair-skinned Messiah who's traveling with his mother and preaches a doctrine of love, and he's come to be a spiritual teacher.
Claims he was born of a virgin who was persecuted in his land and who escaped and who was saved by God.
And you have, in various parts of, for instance, Kashmir, people who still to this day ascribe belief in a great teacher called Yusuf, who they say was Jesus, who came to them after the crucifixion and was buried there. And actually, this is a picture of the famous Rose Ball in Kashmir.
You said that like such a public school boy. Rose Ball. Rosabal. This is Rosabal.
Rosabal. I discovered it in my recent expedition. From Mr. Connolly. He set me up. So here we have the Rosabal of Hazrat Yusuf and a great saint, a Muslim saint there. And actually we have a video. Shall we play the video which talks about this?
Yeah, and it's from the BBC, so it's got to be true.
It's got to be true. So let me just get that up. It's from a BBC documentary talking about these people, and the great thing is, we've been looking into this more recently as well. Although it's been, the writing's been on the wall since Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad wrote that book, Jesus in India, and he was the great pioneer of this, and he claimed that divine revelation ultimately brought him to this truth. But as time has gone on, you've only had more evidence that actually there are these people in Kashmir and in these areas who ascribe belief in Jesus and say that this is exactly what happened, and you have written oral testimony for that. But let's go to the BBC to ratify everything that we're saying.
And we have to ask the question, where would he go? And you just look at a map. Palestine is on the far eastern border of the Roman Empire. If you go west, you're going right into the heart of Roman territory, where we have our 15 legions stationed around the world. If you go east, you're crossing over into Parthia, and you're going towards Persia eventually, and India and Afghanistan, that direction.
But apart from escaping rearrest, why would Jesus travel east? And how would he get there? If Jesus did want to travel east, away from the Roman Empire, the journey from Israel was surprisingly easy by land or by sea, on the Silk Route or the Spice Route. It's an accepted fact, for instance, that the disciple Thomas traveled to India and founded a Christian church there.
The great tradition of the Indian church is that it was founded by Thomas the Apostle. To travel to India would be no problem. He just had to go down to Gaza, link up with one of the spice trains returning, and then from Yemen get a boat to India. It would have been a very simple, easy procedure that was done regularly.
But if Jesus traveled or returned to the east, surely there would be legends like those in the south of France to support the idea. And of course there are such traditions. The people here in Kashmir call their tribe Ben-e-Israel and claim to be descendants of the lost tribes. And here there are stories that the 1st century preacher Isa, known locally as Yusasaf, meaning leader of the healed, returned to Kashmir in his 30s. Yus Asaf's ministry here can easily be seen as a continuation of the Jesus ministry. And in a local temple called the Temple of Solomon, there used to be an inscription which told of Yus Asaf's claim around the year 50 AD to be Jesus, the prophet from Israel. Kashmiri history books tell us that Yus Asaf came from abroad. He was a prophet and a messenger. He came from Israel. He came to spread his teachings. He lived and died here. He is Jesus. He is Isa. The meaning of Yus Asaf is the healer. Another meaning is the shepherd, one who teaches others. And our history books confirm that Isa was known as Yus Asaf here in Kashmir. Yus Asaf continued to teach and preach in Kashmir until he died around the year 80 AD. He was buried in Srinagar. And this, they say, is Yus Asaf's tomb. The first building erected around this site was built in 112 AD. In fact, it's now a shared gravesite. In the 15th century, the Islamic holy man Syed Nazir ud-Din was also buried here. Although both gravestones under the cloth point north-south in the Islamic tradition, the body of Yus Asaf is buried beneath in a grave dug east-west in the Jewish tradition. Next to the sarcophagus are 2 carved footprints. The marks on these are said to be the symbolic representations of the scars of crucifixion. The footprints were carved as a sign. The scars are clearly visible, received when he was nailed to the cross. They show that this is the same person who came from Israel and that he lived and died here. You won't find any footprints like these anywhere else in Kashmir. We don't have that tradition. The position of the scars, just behind the toes, do not match each other, but they would align if a single nail was driven through both feet with the left foot placed over the right. There are many who believe this tomb to be the tomb of Jesus. If this is the tomb of Jesus, then he spent most of his life in the mountain kingdom of Kashmir. He did not die on the cross. There was no resurrection. He did not ascend into heaven, and he does not sit at the right hand of God. For many Christians, this would be the end of Christianity as we know it.
I'm not even, I can't even hear the audio on that clip, and I've watched it so many times, I know exactly when the funky Kashmiri music is starting.
I mean, it's an amazingly well put together documentary, actually, and I think it pretty much ends there. And basically concludes on that.
Do you remember we interviewed the director of this documentary for for an event a long time ago. We might be able to bring him back on, actually. I think that'd probably be a really good idea.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah. And I think it's extremely well done, and it's fairly conclusive. I think our podcast listeners should try and watch this clip that we put on, because the actual visuals really, really sell it, of how the scars line up to show that they were basically, crucified feet.
Yes. Did Jesus die on the cross, or he survived crucifixion?
That's from Coeta 44. Thank you for that. So, I mean, pretty amazing stuff, and I think that's actually an incredible. I think the West in general would greatly appreciate this understanding of Jesus.
Well, it's only been around since 1910. This idea. It seems like they haven't appreciated it very much till now.
No, but I think it's slowly becoming more known. But the thing is that much of the West is that they're quite proud of their culture and their history. But the Christian religion that's come with it, obviously it's been largely, or to a great degree, discarded, because many people feel it's irrational, the idea of three gods in one, the idea of believing things on blind faith. It didn't accord with the scientific understanding that many in the West were developing, so it was left. But if you can actually say, well, look, Jesus was a true man, but he was a man, he wasn't God, and you can believe in Jesus and believe in his moral majesty and in the beautiful teachings which he gave you morally, without having to believe in many more far-fetched things related to, his atoning death, going to hell for a weekend, and coming back, and then
original sin.
Yeah, and going to and then suddenly ascending to heaven, and the idea is going to come back in the rapture.
Yeah.
If you can actually still believe in a prophetic figure who gave you moral guidance, but actually he died in a naturalistic way, like everyone else, then I think that's an extraordinary way for them to really reclaim the Christian aspects of their heritage.
No, I fully agree, 100%. And I think that this ties together nicely, because what did Jesus say about his second coming? What did Jesus say about the second coming? He said that John the Baptist was the second coming of Elijah. That means Elijah was dead. Right? Yeah. So when Jesus says he's going to come again, what does it mean? It means he's going to die. Okay, because that's Jesus. That's not our understanding. That's Jesus's understanding. It's not in our books. It's in the New Testament. Yep. Okay, that's Jesus's understanding that the second coming means somebody else is going to come, which means the first person is dead. Right, which means you better start looking for his tomb. And here it is.
And looking for the one who came in his spirit and his power.
Yeah, and I think it's really significant, actually, the historical parallels between the Jews setting up the state of Israel and becoming more extreme, after Jesus' coming, and Muslims in today, and the formation of, for example, these kinds of extremist movements. There are so many extremist movements. People think of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're the most extreme. There are actually a whole panoply of extremist movements, from, Jamaat-e-Islami to a wide variety of them, across the board, in various countries. So the reality is that these have all been set up after the coming of the Muslim Messiah, because he also, like Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God's. And he set up a movement, the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, which is purely apolitical. In other words, it has nothing to do with politics. And it is a movement that supports the separation of mosque and state. So we do not believe that Islam should be the ruling government. It should be the religion of the government. The government should be without a religion. It should be a secular government. This is what he taught us. Okay, so the parallels are striking, and it's interesting. And this is the last thing I'll say on the matter. That's probably a lie, but this is one of the last things I'll say on the matter, which is that
not the first thing.
All of these discussions we've been having, that Christians believe that the second coming will occur, Jews believe that the Christ will come, Muslims believe that the second coming will occur. They all believe that all of these signs have been fulfilled, and then the person's going to come. Whereas actually that's backwards. Okay, the signs always come after the person appears. And the reason they come after the person appears is because they act as a testimony. They're also called in religious scriptures witnesses. Each sign is a witness. You can't witness something that hasn't happened yet. You can only witness something that's happened. Okay? And the reason they are there, the reason the signs come, is to make it easy for the ordinary person who doesn't read religious texts to say, that's pretty obvious. That sounds like that prophecy I've been being told since I was a child. right? Oh my good, Burj Khalifa. Oh, that reminds me of a hadith I read. Do you know what I mean? So, the tallest building in the world built by Bedouin Arabs. These are signs that happen after the person appears to clarify that he's come and that this person was true. Yeah. Because otherwise, if the person comes after the signs, then actually any Tom, Dick, and Harry can stand up and say, that sign, it was for me. Yeah. In which case, the sign doesn't actually clarify anything. It actually makes it more ambiguous.
Yeah. Because there are signs and you don't know to whom they belong.
Yeah.
So when you see the sign, search for someone who's already claimed.
Exactly.
And we would say that these signs appeared in the life of the Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, and then obviously afterwards as well, they were further fulfilled. Yeah. After him, so many different signs of different characters. Yeah. That's a very important point. So, I hope what we've tried to do is show that an understanding of religious history is key. An understanding of religion in general is key because it informs world events in such a profound way. But of course, that's the lowest level of it, if you will. If you're just looking to understand worldly events, then you need to understand these different trends. But if one is actually looking to understand your place in the world and understand or think about whether religion could be true, I think people should look into this more rational and naturalistic, in a sense, understanding of religious scripture and actually an understanding of religious prophecies that accords better with the prophets who made them and the things that they said and the things that have happened before. How have things happened before? Same way that they've happened before. God's going to do that, going to follow the same method that he used before again. And I think for us and other Muslims in the Ahmadiyya community, it's a very heartening thing to have, even just intellectually, to have a religious faith which is extremely rational and which one can actually fully justify and which isn't fantastical and yet which is no less spiritual.
That is so coincidental that our show is called Rational Religion. I can't believe that that's actually lined up. It's like the stars have aligned.
I mean, what was the name you originally gave the platform?
Let's not go there.
Slightly more militant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to discuss before we go?
No, I think that's all right.
So that's the exact line I use with my patients in my psychiatric clinics. Anything else you wanted to discuss before we?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Cool. So thank you very much. I'll look at the camera now. Thank you very much for watching our debut episode of the Rational Religion Show, or listening to us on the podcast platform which you're using, which we will discover and upload it to. We have many more episodes lined up. We're going to be doing this pretty much weekly. Our next one's going to be on the Black Lives Matter issue and the issue regarding race and class that we're all encountering these days. And we're going to be discussing many more things, including the themes that we've discussed here about the Jesus' second coming and religious history and so much more. So if you enjoyed this and you're watching on YouTube, please do give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell, please. We'd really appreciate it. And any feedback generally on this show or this format would be much appreciated.
I also accept Western Union.
That's great. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Input.
No problem.
So until next time, thank you very much, and peace be upon you.
Peace be on you.